The sky is the limit for this massive offensive tackle that just committed to Penn State.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football recruiting, and thank you so much for checking out another edition of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Zach Seyko, and I am your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. Well, we are going to talk about the latest offensive tackle to commit to Penn State, making this 24 total commits. Marlon Bright out of the state of New Jersey, standing at 6'7", 280 pounds. What his commitment means, what he does well, what are some areas of improvement for him, as well as the outlook of the offensive line that Phil Trautwein long-term continues to keep this group at an elite level. So Penn State gets its fifth offensive line commitment here with Marlon Bright. As I mentioned, 6'7", 280 pounds, massive frame. You can't teach size, raw power. This guy is just able to move anybody and everybody out of the way. So strength is certainly not an issue. He is listed as an industry 3-star, but he's ranked particularly by On3 as a top 225 overall player in the nation. So depending on which rankings you trust there, On3 is very high on Marlon Bright, and he's one of the top 5 players in the state of New Jersey. So I mentioned that strength. Somebody that stands at 6'7", 280 pounds, probably should have no issues moving defensive linemen, whether it's a defensive end or a defensive tackle. And I was honestly impressed with the balance that he has between run blocking and pass protection, because when it comes to run blocking, he's just able to, like I said, move people out of the way, push the pile, tons of pancakes on his highlight film. But then in pass protection, showing that footwork, which I think is ahead for the most part. When I would refer back to another Penn State commit, Jack Fuchs, who is committed in this class of 2026, 6'8". So he's slightly taller than Marlon Bright here. But we don't know how Fuchs is as a pass protector. And at least with Marlon Bright, you can see that he's reliable, that he's comfortable with it. The footwork is there, hand placement, those kinds of things. So pass pro is actually one of his better attributes, but he's much better as a run blocker. Downhill speed, impressive for his size, which leads me to this. It is impressive for his size. The way that he is able to move downhill when he gets at a top speed, it is tough you do not want to be in the way of Marlon Bright. But in that same breath, he needs to improve in his quickness and his acceleration. I do think it takes time for him to get going, to get at that top speed. I'll also say this, at 6'7", this is very understandable, but certainly you work on this technique at the collegiate level, right? This is what Phil Trautwein is for as an offensive line coach. He does play too high at times. Sometimes he plays a little too tall, and then that elevated pad level will allow for defenders to easily get underneath of them, and then they'll be able to maneuver and stuff. Bright is a redshirt candidate. I wouldn't expect anything different. I don't see Penn State burning his red shirt. This has to do with the fact, and we're going to talk about this more, where Penn State's offensive line stands overall in addition to the class of 2026. But if he redshirts, enrolls early, and you start that developmental clock, I would say year 3 is where I can see him seriously contributing, but he definitely needs time to get adjusted to the speed of the college game, add on that weight, because he's listed at 280 right now. He's definitely going to have to be 300, 310 pounds as an offensive tackle. So get with Penn State's strength and conditioning program, and this won't be an issue long term. Now, he definitely wanted to be a Nittany Lion. Bright visited Penn State, according to On3, 12 times, a dozen visits. So I don't want to say that this was just an easy recruitment. Penn State ended up defeating Illinois, West Virginia in the end to land Bright, but it seemed like the signs were there. There were projections placed Now, Rivals isn't its own entity anymore, but before they merged with On3, the guys over at Happy Valley Insider said that Bright was projected to Penn State for the longest time. So this one, all signs pointed that Bright was going to go to Penn State. And this is the fifth commitment for the Nittany Lions. I see tons of upside for Marlon Bright. And Phil Trautwein, with this 2026 offensive line class, continues to build out long-term for the future. And it's not just about filling gaps. No, there's a purpose with all these recruitments. We're going to talk about where things stand and why I'm extremely impressed with not only the class of 2026, but just the long-term outlook for the offensive line, where Penn State doesn't have to worry about this for the next 2-3 years. That is all coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. You got to download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. We're talking anything: sports, concerts, comedy, theater events, you name it. Gametime makes getting concert tickets this summer faster and easier than ever. Prices on the app actually go down as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. But those aren't the only tickets that are available. Sporting events, Major League Baseball, WNBA, Penn State football tickets. If you want to get tickets ahead of time, Penn State football tickets are up on Gametime. And one of the better features is the panoramic seat view. So if you've never been to Beaver Stadium before, you've never been to a concert venue, you will get that point of view ahead of time so you're not second guessing yourself. And that's why you use Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets, tickets to sporting events with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Phil Trautwein continues to do a masterful job here with offensive line recruiting, but it is more than that. It is the fact that he's not only able to recruit, it's being able to retain. Offensive line is deep. This 2025 team, you could make the case that some of the players on the three deep part of the depth chart could at least be strong contributors, guys that aren't expected to play right away unless there is a situation, but that's what depth is for. If you run into those injuries, that kind of thing. So Troutwine is recruiting at a high level. He's also retaining the players that he recruits at a high level. You don't see this constant turnover, the rotation, because offensive line, there's so much competition, but there isn't this influx of talent that is leaving. There isn't an exodus every season, and that's what impresses me the most about Troutwine is he's able to identify those players that want to be at Penn State, right? Marlon Bright, kind of obvious here with the 12 visits, but in this day and age of transfer portal and NIL, you don't see all of this turnover with the offensive line in particular, and that's why this group for 2025, even with losing 80% of the offense, I mean, Drew Shelton's going to move on, Vanga Ioane, Nick Dawkins. So you have Cooper Cousins and Anthony Donko back, but Nolan Rucci is that co-starter at right tackle alongside Anthony Donko. You are going to have to replace tons of players for 2026 in that season, not even respective to this class. But then Javen Williams should be expected to step up, and Alex Birchmeyer, a TJ Shanahan. So I have no worries about the fact that, Penn State's got to replace maybe 4 starters at the end of the day, depending on the Rucci Donko situation at right tackle. They're still in a great spot for 2026. And then beyond that with 2027, and that's why this group for 2026, this class of 2026, there's no pressure. There's no pressure on them. Phil Trautwein is doing this strategically. He is recruiting high upside players. Now, we'll talk about them individually, just kind of who they are, a quick synopsis of each player that is committed at this point in time out of the 5. Well, we talked about Bright, but the other 4 players, including a guy who is a 5-star player and could start sooner rather than later when that opportunity presents itself. But there's no pressure on the class of 2026. They can take their time. They can develop properly and learn and be in that 2 deep, 3 deep part of the depth chart, but with no expectation to start unless somebody breaks through and is ahead on their developmental clock. So now let's get into this class of 2026. High ceiling, raw talent, but they have the time to develop. Kevin Brown is kind of the one that is separate from the group. I do mean this genuinely. He could be a backup on this team this season. In 2025, he could forego his high school senior season if he enrolled now for the summer, hypothetically. Brown would be, I think, a backup at any of the tackle spots or both of the guard spots. That is just how polished he is. Footwork, agility, football IQ, everything that you're looking for, Kevin Brown has it. Any question that you have, it's answered by Brown. So he is the crown jewel of not only this offensive line class, but I think overall he is the headline prospect in this 2026 class. He'll be, if the recruiting rankings catch up, if On3/Rivals, 24/7, ESPN do their jobs correctly, he will be a consensus 5-star. Not just, okay, well, the rankings are behind. No, he continues to go to these showcases and is the best player far and above, at least for the offensive line. Now, there's one prospect that I think in due time we'll have more conversations about, because Benjamin Eziuka, strong player, he is a true guard where you could make the case that, hey, Marlon Bright could play guard or tackle depending on the situation. He projects as a tackle, but guard's not out of the question. Eziuka's an interior offensive lineman. He's a wrestler. He's disciplined. He has the work ethic. There's a story about Eziuka where he came into one of these Penn State showcase camps and Phil Trautwein gave him a list of objectives to follow if he wanted to be a serious Division I football player. And he responded. He had to drop 30, 35 pounds. He did that. Eziuka just responds well, has the work ethic, high football IQ. So this is a player that after Kevin Brown, Eziuka should be expected to be a consistent starter if things continue to go well. I've already mentioned in this conversation with Marlon Bright, Jack Fuchs, freak athlete at 6'8", 295 pounds. We want to talk about athleticism. Marlon Bright moves well, and then there's Fuchs. And I continue to bring up how, high football IQ, but his dad's an assistant offensive line coach with the Tennessee Titans. So you know that he's going to know football. But another player that doesn't need to come in right away, can take his time, develop, continue to grow into that frame and build out that athleticism where that can easily be your starting right tackle of the future for Penn State. With the way that he's able to move guys and run, he's a stellar run blocker. The question mark is, though, how is he as a pass protector? Because we don't know. His team in high school right now does not run the football. We have no idea how he is as a pass blocker, but I don't think Penn State would take this commitment if they had that many concerns about him in pass pro. Roseby Lubintus is the last prospect in this group, and I would say right now has the most to gain in this situation. He needs to develop, or at least I would say he has the most uphill battle of these recruits. You can't teach size. Again, a great frame, 6'6", 350 pounds. He's probably going to have to lose a little bit of weight. Maybe he keeps the weight on, but you can see that there is a gap in the athleticism, in his movement. Footwork's a little bit slower. I could see him moving inside to guard because the athleticism at this point in time at least doesn't give me too much promise. You have Kevin Brown, you have Marlon Bright, you have Jack Fuchs, right? All of these players that you now have the luxury that if Lubintus doesn't respond to left or right tackle very well, look at Venga Ioane, for example, somebody that is 6 foot, I think, what is he, 6'5", 6'6"? Maybe I have that wrong, but he's 350, 360 pounds. And look at the way that he is able to move as a guard. So Lubintus, I don't want to draw that comparison right away because Venga Ioane is a different caliber type of prospect. He was extremely underrated. I just don't think the scouting really knew about him, but Penn State found that diamond in the rough, and you see why they take the commitments that they do. So there is the promise there with Lubintus, but I think he just has a long-term outlook that is a little more uncertain in this case. But to wrap things up, no pressure on this group. They can all have their own individual developmental clocks. They will be great on the depth chart as they continue to learn and get better. But Phil Trautwein, to go and find the players that he does, more importantly, to be able to retain them and no worries about, hey, what's the depth chart going to look like in 2026? What's it going to look like in 2027? 2028, it's going to be difficult to project because there is the transfer portal. You don't know what's going to happen. But at least for the next few seasons, the next 3 years, offensive line is the furthest thing from an issue. And that's where we'll finish things up here on this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. This is the first of 2 projected commitments today. Marlon Bright gets things started the day after the 4th of July. I hope everyone had a safe and happy and healthy holiday. And again, if you're celebrating this weekend, I wish you nothing but more of the same. Thank you so much for checking out another edition of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. Thank you to the everydayers for making us a part of your regular routine. If you're not an everydayer, become one. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams.